We are live. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the throne room. We're going to give everyone a moment. Of course, you guys all know we'll give everyone a few moments to come on in and join us in the throne room, the place where we have created a space for us to be able to purge from our issues, heal from our wounds, and most importantly, find rest so that we can transform into that which we have been called and created to become, and that is royalty. I really thank you guys for allowing me the opportunity to share my healing journey experience with you. And I hope that you guys are feeling empowered and feeling the courage to take your own healing journey as well. And today I'm really excited because we have a very special guest, one of my favorite people. She is a close friend of mine, and we met each other through another close friend of mine. And I'm excited that she's here. We're going to introduce her in just a few minutes. So we're going to give everyone an opportunity to come in. And as always, we want to hear from you. So do not hesitate to drop a comment or question into the comment box. And Geralda, just so you know, you'll be able to see the comments too on the side. It'll say comments, and you'll be able to see them there too. But don't hesitate to come in and let us know how you're feeling. Let us know if you have any questions. Today's topic is on grief, and we know that grief comes in many different forms and many different ways, and sometimes we're grieving and not even know that we're grieving. And so today we're going to have an expert come in and talk to us about grief. I'm going to actually just hit the share link, copy link. All right. So everyone, I want again to welcome our special guest, the Reverend Geralda Aldajuste. She is here with us all the way from New Jersey, and that's right, Jersey, right? And I'm going to give her an opportunity to tell us a little bit about herself, what she does, who she is, and her background. I mean, it's phenomenal. I've known her for, I don't know, how long have we known each other? About 4 years?
I think about that now.
Yeah, it's been some time.
Yes, yeah.
So, Geralda, just tell the people about yourself. Tell them what you do, where you come from, what you love.
Thank you so much. This is a wonderful opportunity. I truly appreciate you for inviting me to be able to speak truth to some things. And I am a licensed funeral director. I've been in the funeral industry for about 25 years. I'm licensed in the state of New York as well as New Jersey. I'm more of a practicing funeral director in New Jersey. I'm also a pastor of a church in Willingboro, New Jersey. I am the associate professor of the funeral service program at Mercer County Community College. I'm also the advisor. I'm also the advisor for anyone who desires to come into the field but do not have the 60 college credits. So I help them to look at the curriculum and select the proper courses so that they can get the 60 college credits. And I'm also I do I'm a life insurance agent, but more importantly, I'm a certified grief recovery specialist. And at one point in time, I used to be a death investigator for the Middlesex County Medical Examiner's Office, where I was also the bereavement. They considered me to be the bereavement counselor for Middlesex. So that way, anytime there were families in which we, of course, went to their homes and whether it was an investigation of a homicide, suicide, whatever, unattended death, they knew that that family was going to be grieving that loss. And so they wanted someone to be able to help them and provide the proper resources. So I was always contacted to do so. So I am so happy to be here.
Yeah, well, guys, she just told y'all she's more than qualified to be up in the throne room to have these conversations with us. And so we're excited to have her today. We're going to just do what we always do best, and we're going to take the cover off. It's time where we actually put on our curious hats. We keep an open mind. We are absolutely 100% vulnerable and transparent. We show empathy towards one another, and most importantly, we respect the process. And so, as we begin our conversation regarding grief, as I said, there's so many different forms of grief. A lot of people don't even know that grief, there are many different ways in which people grieve, different types of grief. And so, Reverend Geralda, could you tell us a little bit more about what that means? What are the different types of griefs? Whatever you want to talk about, however you want to say it.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that, because that is so true that when people think of the word grief, they think of death. And grief can be a death of a pet. It could be moving. It could be starting school. It could be marriage, as a matter of fact, graduation, end of addictions, mental health change, retirement. It could be legal problems. It could be empty nest. It could be financial changes, whether it be positive or negative. And then we must add loss of trust, loss of approval, loss of safety, loss of faith, loss of control of your body.
That's
And
good.
the definition of grief is that we know that even though grief is the normal and natural reaction to loss, but the vast majority of what we learn in our society about dealing with loss is not normal, it's not natural, and it's not helpful. And so, grief is the definition is the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. And what we've all realized too, that the pandemic um, placed us in a end of or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. So this pandemic made sure that if you were not grieving before, then you're grieving now. You
Right.
know, and also there are two statements that I wanted to share with all of you that reflect what some people may be feeling when they're dealing with grief. And for those of you who have been devastated by the death of someone you love, your grief may be the feeling of reaching out for someone who's always been there for you, only to discover when you need them one more time, they're no longer there. And then there's another statement for those of you who have been impacted by the death of someone who should have been a loving person to you but wasn't. Your grief may be the feeling of reaching out for someone who was never there for you, only to discover when you need them one more time, they're still not there.
That's
And then
deep.
so we have to deal with grief, because unfortunately, if we don't deal with grief, there's going to be what is called unresolved grief. And we certainly want for people to have what is known as completeness.
Yeah, that's good. That's deep. You got me thinking so hard right now. I'm like, normally I have the comment right back at it, but what you just said was so powerful. There was a lot packed into that, even all the way down to the grief of faith and all kinds of things like that. And I think about church hurt and things like that. It's a heavy thing, and not to realize and recognize that you're grieving in the process could be detrimental, especially if you don't know how to grieve, right?
Right.
So is there such a thing of knowing how to grieve?
Um, I don't think anyone really necessarily knows how to grieve, but I think um, the issue that sometimes we have is when we are grieving. Um, we need people to be supportive. We need people to be able to listen to us without analyzing us, criticizing us, making judgments or any type of interruption. And what happens is when people don't realize it, but oftentimes they make unhelpful comments when someone is hurt and when someone is grieving. And it's not because that they're mean spirited, but it's because they just don't know what to say.
Right.
And none of us learned about grief in school. We didn't take grief 101. It wasn't something that was mandatory. But when someone is grieving, well intentional friends and family, they try to help by repeating what they heard following their own losses or what they've seen in movies. They rarely stop to think about what they're saying, and they simply do what they think is best, which is often intellectualizing the grief rather than keeping the emotional experience that it is. And so what we learn is that sometimes we just got to be heart with ears. Sometimes people
Mm,
just need our presence. They just need to know that we're just going to be there. And there's
mm,
and also there's this we feel as though we should always say to someone, I know how you feel.
mm.
We can't always know how someone feel because every relationship is unique. Just because, and if we're
Good.
talking about death, for example, um, if my daughter passes away and your daughter passes away, don't say you know how I feel because
Right.
your relationship with your daughter may
It's
not.
not be the same. That's
It's
right.
not the same. Or if I'm going through a divorce, and
Yeah,
I'm grieving, just because you went through a divorce, don't say you know how I feel.
yeah, that's true.
So we have to realize that we need to be heart with ears, and we can't always intellectualize everything.
That's good. That's real good. So I often hear people, even in all kinds of spaces, right? Like, I know what you're going through. I've been there before, whatever. And they're trying to use that as a way to relate, right? As a way to connect with the person.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
but there's two questions that I have here. What is the best way to connect to the person without having to say, I know what you've been through? And then what are some of the tools to help us manage the grief, which is a question that one of our listeners has asked.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that is a very good question because, like you said, even if we've experienced a parallel loss, we never know exactly how someone feels. And that's because,
Yeah.
again, every relationship is unique. And what we need to say is, I can't imagine how you feel, you know? Uh,
Mm,
and sometimes we hear people say, don't feel bad, you know, but then as if somebody can magically stop feeling bad, and
yeah.
the implication is that there is something wrong with their feelings. Um, and then so we have to ask the question, would you ever tell someone to not feel good?
Mm,
And so the best thing to say when we identify with some of the thoughts and feelings someone is saying relative to their grief is we got to say, I hear you loud and clear,
yeah.
and although I don't know how you feel, I can certainly relate to what you're saying.
Mm,
That will be much better received and make it more meaningful connection than I know how you feel.
yeah.
Especially when we tell a child, be strong. You telling a child to be strong, or you got to be the man. You got to be the man now. How he gonna know how to be the man? He only 8 years old.
I,
He only 12 years old.
You want to know something that's funny about that
Huh?
situation? So I'm gonna bring in a personal story of mine, which is
Uh-huh.
during my divorce, right?
Mhm.
Someone was saying there were people that came to my son and said, now it's just you and your mom and your brothers and sisters, and so you are now the man of the house. And I said, don't do that. Don't say that. He's not the man of the house. And I even had to apologize to him because oftentimes,
Mhm.
um, I placed him in a position unknowingly in a position where he may have been parenthesized to the point where he had
Mm.
to feel like he had to be the man of the house. I
Right.
think
Right.
that we do an injustice to our children when we
Yeah.
put them in positions to make them think that they have to be the man of the house, and instead of allowing them space to grieve their
Right.
own process, right?
Right.
And to be present with them so that they could learn how to healthily respond to traumatic experiences like that. But I'm with you. Continue on. I didn't mean to interrupt. I wanted to throw that little
No,
nugget in
that
there. That's a real big one for me.
no, that's absolutely great. And because we have to realize too that every time we say certain things like that, we're kind of dismissing
Yeah.
the way that that person feel, and we're also letting them know that we do not want them to be able to express. themselves. And one thing I've learned with grief is that although loss, although whatever grief we're going through, maybe 99% responsible for how we feel, we must be willing to take 1% of the responsibility for our reaction to loss. And it is essential that also we all begin to understand the idea of taking responsibility for our reactions to loss, because it is the only thing that we can actually work on. And so you mentioned earlier, right, recovery from loss is achieved by a series of small and correct choices that is made by the griever. As a certified grief recovery specialist, I do an 8-week course. And I'm not a counselor where I'm just going to sit there and talk to you and hear a response. You have to be part of your journey. You have to be a participant. You have to do the homework. If the assignment is to do a loss history graph, meaning that you're going to put your dawn of conscious memory, like the age of where you remember everything, to the year of now, and list all of the loss that you've had in your life. And then, I tell you to put like a line. The longer the line, the more traumatic or significant it is. But being able to see, because I remember for me, graduating from high school, graduating from college, I didn't understand why everybody was crying. I'm like, why are you crying? But that's because for them, it was going to be a change.
Yes.
So grief is the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. And
That's
so
good.
for them, they're now entering a new school, because you're leaving 8th grade, you're going to high school, and majority of their friends may not be going to the same school. But I didn't realize that at the time. Or when you're moving, now you have to go to a new neighborhood, get acclimated to new things, new people, your new surroundings. So yes, so grief is the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. And
Mm,
the recovery process is not only taking 1% responsibility of how you react to the loss, but making the small necessary steps. And the small necessary steps is where someone like myself, a certified grief recovery specialist, comes in. And in our interaction, there is homework assignment, there is activities that you're doing. And those activities, I have my clients where they say, I thought I came for this thing. I thought I came because my mother died. But I
right.
just realized my relationship with my sister right now. And
Mm,
so the tools that I'm giving is so that you could apply to every type of loss, whether it is a divorce, whether it is the death of an estranged parent, whether it is a current relationship. Because
mm.
another person said, wait a minute, I didn't realize it, but the person that I am currently in a relationship with, that's who I should be doing this assignment on, So,
Wow, wow. So things don't have to necessarily be dead in order for you to be grieving it or go through a healing process so
right.
that you can kind of overcome the grief, right?
Yes, yes.
So we're here in what you're saying. I hear that there's some misunderstandings and misrepresentations of what grief is. Do you have any more insights for us about some of the misunderstandings or some of the misinformed things that we might think about concerning griefs or someone else healing in their grief process?
Another one thing I just learned about over the summer, where there's a misconception where, um, for example, I never heard the term vicarious trauma before.
Wow. Yeah.
But in my research in grief, I had to learn that there's many of us, for example, with the Black Lives Matters, just being able to watch uh,
Right.
what happened to Breonna Taylor or George Floyd. Um, what vicarious trauma is being a witness, being
Right.
it's what it is. It's a secondary grief. It's an indirect exposure to a traumatic event through either firsthand account or a narrative of that event, and sometimes even just by hearing, like, oh my God, And then that itself w- makes you respond in certain ways. Maybe you might all of a sudden respond in fear, fear to go
Right.
out, fear to be encountered by police, or fear to be whatever the case may be. But also vicarious trauma also is for, it occurs to people who are working or volunteering, whether you're law enforcement, whether you're emergency medical service, whether you're in fire service or allied profession. And what happens is when you are feeling this type of grief, or where it's attached to you, and people don't take you seriously. Oh, you didn't know him. It wasn't like he was your brother, or she wasn't your sister. You act like you knew her. You act like you knew him. When
Mm,
people still need a safe place in order to express their feelings, express what they're going through, and
right.
again, not be criticized, not be analyzed, not be judged. Because the negative things that happens is that now you begin to have negative uh, difficulty in managing your emotions, or uh, um, you may have relationship problems. And
Right.
so these are the things that further hurt you from your journey, your healthy journey through grief.
Yeah, this is all good. This is really good. Um, I want to thank you, Reverend Geralda, for sharing this information. And for those of you who are just joining us, please feel free to if you have a comment or a question, please feel free to drop it in the comment section below. We do want to hear from you. Uh, please like and share. We want to add additional people to the conversation. People really need to hear about the things in which the misconceptions and the ways in which we can begin to heal from our grief process. Right now, there are people out here who are really wondering, like, what am I going through? Why am I feeling so down? I feel dark. I feel depressed. I feel really, down and out and dreary. I'm sleepy all the time. I can't seem to get myself together. We want to invite those people to the conversation so that they might be able to have a space where they could recognize what it is that they're going through. And maybe they're grieving through something, not necessarily death, but that they're grieving through something that has been a change, a transition in their life, something that they didn't even recognize that was there. It could be at work or anything else. The workload gets heavy and we begin to grieve even in that process, right? And
Yeah.
so we want to open up the doorway for people to be a part of this conversation. Don't forget to go to royaltynetwork.net and you can find all of the other information here for our throne room conversations. But let's continue on this wonderful conversation. So, is there, when we're talking about this whole part of grief, is there a time frame for someone to stop grieving, or is there anything that we should be expecting per se from an individual in their grief process to for when they're supposed to say, okay, I'm good, I need to, I'll got myself together? Is there anything like that a part of this process?
Wow. The reality is that we will grieve in a capacity for the rest of our life, to be honest with you. Um,
That's
but
good.
again, it's just making those necessary um, uh, small choices, using the tools in order to help you through, um, especially being mindful that when someone asks you if you're all right, you don't lie about it and say, yes, I'm all right. And people tend to do that. They tend to mask their the truth of their emotions and what they're going through. Um, and and these are the people. If you are not honest about your emotion, if you're not allowed to express it, that's where you tend to get stuck. And then you won't be able to get the proper rest, or the appropriate self care that you need. So all of us have to really, truly get in touch with our true feelings in order for us to move in a genuine and honest way. Um, Now, again, it means that the griever, the person who's grieving, has to take an active part in their grief process and understand that coping comes from the different forms. Coping comes in many different forms, and that
Right.
they just have to take the necessary steps. Have you ever heard of STIRBs before?
I have, but tell the
Yeah.
people what it is.
Short-term energy releasing behaviors.
And tell them about what are some of the things in which exhibits and what are you supposed to do with this. So even give an example if you want to do an exercise, feel free, whatever is up to you.
So STIRBs is like alcohol, drugs, gambling, food, sex, shopping, known as retail therapy, isolation, fantasies, whether it's through books, workaholism, or any activity that distracts you from emotions. And it's actually very common in our society to have been socialized with the idea that we should cover up our emotional pain rather than confronted directly. So, STIRBs are a perfect example of an indirect and sometimes damaging way of avoiding our real feelings. So sometimes you never know. Like, wait a minute, boy, I'm eating a lot, or mm, I gotta have that glass of wine every night. Now, we're not saying, but
Where my plum wine at?
but we right, we love one. And then you went from one to maybe three glass a night. So, you got to be able to assess that and find
Right.
out what is it that's actually going on. Right. Shopping, the shoes, the
Yes.
smoothie.
Yes.
So,
So tell me, can you repeat the phrase one more time? Recovery from loss is.
so recovery from loss, right? So, what you mean, like, what is grief?
Yeah, so I wanted to get more information of what it is. So tell me about you made a statement that recovering from loss is something, and so you were telling us about that. I want you to repeat that again. That was important.
Okay. I remember I made two statements. I'm not sure if those were,
Tell
one
them
was,
both. It was both good.
okay. For those of you who have been devastated by a loss, or even, let's say, for example, if it was the death of someone you love, your grief may be the feeling of reaching out for someone who's always been there for you, only to
Hmm.
discover that when you need them one more time, they're no longer there. And
Hmm.
then for those of you who have been impacted by the death of someone who should have been a loving person to you, but wasn't, your grief may be the feeling of reaching out for someone who has never been there for you, only to discover that when you need them one more time, they are still not there. And
Hmm.
this is where it applies to like estrangements or divorce. So, for example, if a person always wanted to meet their mother or father. They've always been searching for them and maybe never had that relationship that they wanted to have. And then they finally hear that individual passed away. So
Right.
um, it's the feeling of reaching out for someone who was never there for you, only to discover that when you need them one more time, they're still not there. Or if you lost of a dream, yes. Or if for example, too, if it was an ex-spouse, a spouse, at the time of the marriage was never there for you, never supported you, never was loving or caring, and then later on someone lets you know that they're no longer there, they passed on. So
Mm.
that's what it is. And so, what it does, as Jackie says, because it then becomes like unresolved grief, because unresolved grief is almost always about the things we wish we said or done differently, better or more. For example, I wish I told dad I loved him before it was too late, or I
Mm.
wish I had visited grandma before she died so I can tell her how much she meant to me. And so unresolved grief is always about that unrealized hope of dreams and expectations we had for that relationship. Even in the best of relationships, we are often left with plans that never got to happen.
That's
And
good.
in negative relationships, the death or the divorce robs us of the possibility of repair, thereby preventing the relationship from becoming positive. And unresolved grief is about the undelivered communications of an emotional nature. It is important that we try our best to deliver those communications as much as possible. And sometimes I have them do an exercise where they have to write a letter to
Mm-hmm.
that person. And we're not saying good necessarily, especially if the person's alive, we're not necessarily saying goodbye to the person, but saying
Right.
goodbye to the pain,
Mhm.
to the
Yes.
suffering, to what it is that's really got me like so distraught. We're saying goodbye to that.
You're bringing all of the training and all of the things that I've gone through back into reality. It's so funny because I didn't realize how detached I had gotten from the information that I had trained for, right?
Hmm.
And that goes to show you how important it is to continue to follow up on these things as we as educators, as lay people, we're supposed to always be on top of these things. Um, I'm going to go back to something we were talking about, some of the habits and things, and the trends that we continue to see as we're grieving and things that we don't really see and recognize as a process of grieving. I want to extend this question out to, so what are some of the physical manifestations of grief? What happens to a person physically, if anything, happens to a person when they're grieving?
I would say some of the physicalness can start out as like increased irritability, aggressive behavior. You may become explosive, violent outburst behavior, but also too when you uh, uh, hold that stuff internally, also illnesses can occur. You know, there could be latent or what you call it. What's that word? Illnesses that are kind of like I'm not too familiar with shingles, but I've always heard that it's something that's
Yes.
already in your body. But then
Mm-hmm.
when you are exposed to a traumatic, because I think they said it was
Yeah.
probably like if you've had the chicken pox and maybe
Yeah.
somehow it's still there, and
Mm-hmm.
then you have some type of traumatic event,
Mm-hmm.
maybe an accident or something that happens to you. Maybe
Yes.
you're overly stressed, and then that's
Mm-hmm.
how it actually comes out, and then it now becomes exposed. And
Yeah.
so that's what grief does. If you do not manage it, if you do not get self care, if you do not get proper rest, if you do not find someone that you can talk to, find a group, find somewhere where you could be safe and you could literally talk about your emotions, yes, it will rear its ugly head in other ways.
Yeah, it's good that you mentioned that. One of the things that we find, and I forget the statistics, but there's an overload of African American women who have been
Mm,
diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And the
wow.
reason why, oftentimes I find that when I ask people, well, do
Hmm.
you know how bipolar disorder manifests itself?
Hmm.
Oftentimes they are not aware of that. And I think that it is good to have conversation like this around the fact that bipolar disorder at times, more often than not, especially in the African American community,
Right.
manifests itself through multiple encounters with traumatic experiences that have
Wow.
been left undealt with. And
Amen.
so it when we talk about physical manifestation and the reason why it's so important to seek
Hmm.
out your healing in your grieving process and to connect with community and resources, why it's so important is essentially we can lose our life over our own grief, right?
Yeah.
And we can go crazy when we stay in our own heads and when we don't see ourselves outside of where we are. And so I'm going to continue our conversation because I can stay on a specific topic for
No,
long.
that's great. I'm
I'm going
loving
to
it.
continue going on because well, we got
I
30
haven't done
minutes
the
left.
correlation with that, but I think that's great because I thought about later on not only vicarious trauma, but I wanted to later on think about historical trauma, and
Yeah,
because
talk
there are
about it.
certain things that we do, we don't know why we do them. Or my mama used to do it that way, or grandma used to do it that way, but we need to find out specifically why.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but no,
That's good.
great point. Thank you.
So let's talk about our children. Children are our future, and that's
Mhm.
one of the loves of my life is all of my beautiful children that I have, right? That God has given me the gift of being able to guide and direct in this lifetime. So how do we help our children who are grieving?
That is a very good question. Especially because as certified grief recovery specialists, we don't necessarily deal with children, have groups, but I know
Mhm.
as a funeral director, and it's one of the courses that I teach called funeral counseling, where we
Mhm.
talk about making sure that you talk to children in concrete terms. Um, don't let them believe that just because grandma is sick, like don't lie to children and say grandma is sleeping because they're going to want grandma to wake up. You
Right.
have to be able to tell them the truth. And I've told a lot of, especially my parishioners, that bring your children to the funeral home. Let them sit in
Yes.
on the arrangements. Let them be able to come in view, um, and let them be able to touch. And also another thing with the
Mm.
concrete terms is that you don't want to tell them something they have to unlearn later.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
you want to be able to truly tell them the truth, because the earlier they are faced with this, the easier they're able to have coping mechanisms. You
Yeah.
want them to be able to cope. But if you have to bury everything and lie to them and never tell them, then then again, you're now allowing them to come up with these things that are just not going to be uh, there is other stuff will manifest that's not going to help them with the true reality of it.
Right.
I see Jackie put New Jersey has an increase in suicide attempts and successes in youth, grieving social interaction. Okay. So yeah, uh, you have to be willing to talk to your children. Even there's an article in the class I talk to children about, for example, if there's a shooting in school.
Mhm.
Um, you want to be able to kind of say to the child, would you like to talk about this?
Right.
You have to give, don't treat them as, they're too young, they don't know. No, they're human beings too. And
Yes.
you'd be so surprised if you just simply take the time out. I mean, depending on the age, you don't want to use big language, but you still want to say, how do you feel about it? Would you like to share with me what you're feeling? Talk to them that way. And then and give it time. Give it time. Open up little by little. But again, as long as we don't make stories and say, well, grandma was sick and so she's sleeping, and then they still wonder where grandma is.
Right.
Grandma went on a vacation.
Yeah. So that's really good. And what I heard was there's age appropriate language. And I want to kind of help guide our audience because there might be someone out here now who's dealing with a similar situation, especially in the age of COVID, loss of parents, loss of sisters, brothers, aunties, uncles. There's just been a tremendous amount of loss in this COVID season. How can give us some examples that we could utilize for age frames? Let's talk about 0 to 5 years old, and then six to whatever that might be, 6 to 8. Give us some. Can you give us some examples of what are some of the things that we can ask our kids, our children, during those different uh, life phases?
Hmm. Um, I guess again, if we just keep it simple, how do you feel? Would you
Mm.
like to talk about it and start a dialogue there? Um,
Do they
Depending on, like
have
you
to know the answer to the questions
know,
that they ask? I think that's important
yeah,
because
you're
oftentimes
absolutely right.
we're scared to ask the question because we're scared that we might not know the answer to it. So,
Right.
what is it that we should know? Equip us with some things that we should know if a child comes to us and asks us a question. do we got to know the answer? What's an appropriate way to respond if we don't know? And how should we deal with their inner feelings?
That is true. We don't have to know the answer. And it's okay to tell a child, I don't know. And
Mm-hmm.
it's also okay to get the help that because you yourself need help. You yourself want to be able to uh, help this child deal with this grief just as much as you're grieving. Because, especially, for example, if it is a violent death, if it is uh, a school shooting, or if it is that child's the other parent. But you do want to first start by allowing them to express their feelings.
Yeah.
The same way, for example, if they have a dog or pet that dies, you don't say, don't worry, we'll get you another one. Like as if you're
Mm,
just dismissing their feelings, and also you're dismissing the significance that that dog or that fish had for that child.
yeah.
um and of course we think, well, we're trying to help them. But we're not helping them if we're hiding it. The best
Yeah.
thing to say is, I know that especially Sparky meant a lot to you.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you would like to do to help us to prepare Sparky? is
Mm,
is even if you have to have like a mock funeral for Sparky, would you anything you'd like to do? you know and you'd be surprised again with your child, because every child is different, every child develops different. But if you just ask those questions, that child will then open up. Now if the child says no, say, no problem, take your time.
good.
What would you like for me to do?
Good. That's
you
good.
know but
I
giving
think,
them the chance to express.
yeah, I think that that was really good because one of the next questions I wanted to ask you was really about when people don't respond the way that we want or think that they should respond while grieving. And so, what is it that we need to really keep at the forefront of our minds when we're dealing with someone or our children who don't respond the way that we think they should? And actually, they kind of, I don't want to use this word, but it's almost like they're going backwards. So rather than going toward their healing process, they actually seem like, you know, they're not going in the direction that would look to us as if they are getting better.
Yeah. I think I might have to just go back to saying, just being heart with ears, listen with our heart,
Mhm.
not with our head, not um, coming up a response for them.
Mhm.
Some people, not everyone wants us to solve their problems for them.
Good. That's
They
good.
just want to know that you're breathing next to them, that you're there. If you say you're going to be there, and just be heart with ears. And also, a hug says it all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hug that child, hug that individual, hold their hand, just listen. Because sometimes they just, if you start talking, it's almost like they want to really say, could you just please shut up? I can't even think myself. But
Right.
they they don't, not everyone wants you to talk. And just because they're asking questions does not mean that they want you to answer. Because now all of a sudden you're trying to say that they are broken and they need to be fixed. They're
Mm,
not broken. There's nothing wrong with them. They just want to be able to openly express without any judgment, without you criticizing, without you analyzing them.
that's real good. That's real good.
And that's
I
the same
want
with children.
So a lot of people don't really know about ES therapies and things like that, but I am going to just make a small note in there that there are some children who will be resistant to physical touch. And so you might have to work your way into that. Um, don't take it personal. It's not a personal thing. It is just their response to a traumatic experience or from a place where they didn't have those types of interactions before. And
Yeah.
there are ways in which you can build up to gaining that type of trust with the child in order for you to be able to move to the next level with them. Um, Geralda, I really, really appreciate the things that you have shared with us today. I think that it was more than needed. I want to be able to continue this conversation as we really delve into our healing journey. A lot of the things that we experience in our hurt have to do with our ability to really handle our grief and see that what we're going through is grief. And I think that having another extension of this conversation will be necessary. And I look forward to you joining again with some others to be in more conversation about this. We really appreciate it. Is there any other really important things that you want to leave with the people, the hearers today, about the grief process, about their healing or helping others heal? We got a lot of people who came on and said, thank you. This is really good. This is a much needed. A lot of wisdom was shared here. So, whatever you want to leave us with, the floor is yours for the next 15 minutes if you want it. So it's yours.
I guess the most important thing that I just want to tell someone is, again, just to participate in your grief. Find a safe place where you can talk, where you can be heard, where because again, don't feel that you have to isolate yourself, because that's another thing with STIRBs. STIRBs can also be something that we isolate ourselves. We feel as though that no one cares and no one wants to hear what we have to say or what we have to share. But do not stop at finding a space that is safe for you to express yourself, to be able to cry, to be able to share, because your story, your testimony is going to be a breakthrough for somebody else. Someone who may not have realized that they were grieving, because there are some people who repress a lot of feelings. And it's not until that you open up, you can be able to help them on their journey towards completeness. And completeness is the result of having delivered those emotional communications that either we never made, or we felt never heard, or that need to be said again with someone hearing us say them. And it gives us the ability to then say goodbye to any pain which may be limited us from fond memories, and say goodbye to any unmet hopes, dreams, and expectations about the future. So the idea is just to find completeness in your life.
That's good. Thank you again, Geralda. If anyone is looking to hear more about our healing journey or get more information about the Healing Challenge, please visit us at royaltynetwork.net. You will be able to meet with us on a weekly basis in the throne room right here on Facebook. We also have a YouTube channel. You can also find us on LinkedIn. We also have a TikTok. So please join us, like and share. We're trying to get the word out, and we want everyone to participate in the Healing Challenge. We want to just say thank you guys for joining us, and until next week, when we will meet back in the throne room for barbershop conversations. Have a safe and wonderful weekend. Geralda, thanks again. Have a great week.